Okay, so this is going to be an intro video about how to create a 3D environment inside of Unity. And we'll create some mountains, maybe some grass, some rocky mountains, some paths, drop in a first-person controller, and be able to walk around in our little environment. And so this assumes that you haven't done anything in Unity before, and so you can just follow along and hopefully make some cool stuff. So inside of Unity, we will just say new project, and if this is the first time that you're running Unity, it's going to show up with this screen anyways. I will call it 3D World or something like that. And make sure you have 3D selected down here. This is 2D, this is 3D. It may not be obvious, but you want the one that's red. So we'll hit Create Project. And hopefully something shows up. Here we go, great. So here is our first 3D project. And we've got a couple of things here inside of Unity that I'll explain this whole interface if you haven't seen it before. We've got stuff over here on the left. These are objects that are in our scene. And currently we have a camera and a light, nothing else. Up here, these are sort of ways that you can interact with your scene. We'll use those a little bit later, but that's what these little buttons are. Is sort of just sets how you interact, what your mouse buttons do as you work around in here. We've got two tabs here in the center. Scene is where we're going to do all of our editing and building and dragging stuff in and that sort of stuff. And game is what we actually see if we were to run our game. And right now, it looks kind of plain because we really don't have anything happening. And then over here on the right is the inspector, which tells us our properties of our certain game objects that we have selected over here on the left. So if I want to click on the main camera, then all of a sudden on the right in the inspector tab, we get all sorts of stuff about our main camera. And if there's anything that we need to change, we can come over here and change it. Same thing with the light. We click over there, and we can change whatever we need to change about the light over here in the inspector. But it's not overly exciting right now because we have a camera, we have a light, but we have no ground to put anything on. And so that's what we're going to work on right now. And in order to do that, we can go to Create and say 3D Object, and we're going to create a terrain. And if you just click on Terrain, now all of a sudden we've got this rectangle down here. And as long as I'm on scene view, if I'm on a game view, it's going to look kind of strange. If you look hard at it, you can see that there is this thing here, this white rectangle, which is our terrain because of the way our camera is positioned. It's sort of looking at it from the side. We look at it in the scene. We're not looking at it from the perspective of this camera. We're looking at it from some sort of editor perspective. But this is what would happen if we were to actually run the game. We would see this sort of stuff. In scene view, we can move around by, if we click with the hand, we can sort of just drag around and see different sections. With the wheel, we can zoom out to see our entire world. This is fairly large. We can zoom in back to where we were to see a piece of our little area. This is just a white terrain, which is not overly exciting, but it's pretty easy to put stuff in here. We're not going to write any code today, so don't get too worried about it if code's not your thing. We're going to go through all of these menus to sort of build this little world. So anyways, we have this terrain, and over here, like we said before, anything you want to set up on the terrain is going to be over here on the right in the inspector. And then I guess I'll also mention that this layout is the default layout of what you get with Unity, but you can make this layout look however you want. You can drag the inspector tab over here. You can leave it where it is. You can make it a window that moves around. Whatever you want to do. But let me see. I want to get this thing back in here. Come on. There we go. And I'm just going to leave it alone. But you can drag this stuff around. So if you would rather have the hierarchy on the right and the inspector on the left, just because you work better that way, then go ahead and do that. Nothing wrong with doing that. So anyways, we've got our terrain. Right now it's just white. But on the properties of the terrain, we've got this little paintbrush, which is kind of neat. It says I want to paint a texture. But we don't have any textures defined. It says right here, no textures defined. And so I can edit textures and add a texture, and it will pop up this little box here. But we don't have anything to put in here. So I'm just going to close this thing out for now. And what we need to do is we need to bring in some assets. We need to bring in some textures. And we can do that. Unity has some stuff built in. There's other places we can get things from. You can make your own. But for now, we're just going to go to Import Package, and I will say Environment. And it's going to pop up and say, okay, we've got all this environmental stuff. Which of this do you want? And we're just going to, by default, everything's checked. So we'll just say import, and it's going to bring everything in. And as you notice down here, this is sort of our work area where we define, where we can import objects and bring them into our scene. And right now it's pretty empty. But as we finish importing, you'll all of a sudden see this thing populate with a whole bunch of stuff that we can use. And it's almost done. So we'll let it finish. But once it finishes, we'll be able to find some terrains that we want to use. And there's other things that we'll be able to use in our scene. All right, there we go. So now inside of our assets folder, we've got a couple things. We've got editor and standard assets. I'm going to double click on standard assets. Then we have environment and terrain assets. Again, we're trying to make this terrain look somewhat normal. And now we have surface textures, which are all these different graphics that it's going to tile together. So I'm going to go back to terrain, edit textures, add a texture, and we'll just use this grass. And I'll drag it. So all I did was, I kind of did that sort of fast. So down here, make sure you expand out all your folders, just like I've got here. And then you'll end up in this little window with the default terrain textures that come with Unity. And what I'm going to do is select and click and drag the texture that I want right over here to this texture here on the left. And so we'll do that. I'll just take this grass and drag it up here, and we're good to go. Add it. And by doing that, now all of a sudden our ground seems to come to life a little bit, and we've got some green there. If we look in our game view, now we've got some green in there as well. But it would be kind of neat if we were able to walk around on this a little bit. So right now, if we wanted to sort of interact with our world or see what it looked like when it was fully rendered, we could hit this play button up at the top. And this is awfully boring, but what we want to do is be able to walk around on it. So we need to add a character controller to it. And that's another thing that we need to import. So I'm going to go to Assets, Import Package, and Characters. And again, let's just take everything. We could go pick and choose if we wanted to really, minimize how big our project was, but this stuff doesn't really take up that much space. And for the demo purposes, it's better to just take it all instead of picking and choosing, because we might not get the right stuff. So here we go. And now what I want to do is I want to add a character controller. So notice under Assets, we've got Characters, First-Person Character Controller, and now we've got prefabs. So prefabs are really important in Unity. They make our lives very easy. And what they are is just a collection of things to do a certain task. So right in here we have a FPS controller. So it's a whole bunch of stuff like cameras and controllers, like using a keyboard, using the mouse. All of that's built into this one object called a prefab, and in this case it's called an FPS controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this FPS controller right here and drag it into our scene. So if I go like this and drag it in, now we have an FPS controller. All right, and now if I run, what's going to happen? Now we're here. And using the arrow keys, I can walk around on our little land. And notice we've got, sort of the up and down from the footsteps. That's all part of our FPS controller. We can look around with the mouse and walk around in this world. And that's pretty cool because we haven't written any code, but we've got this sort of way to move around our world that works out pretty good. So I'm going to unplay this thing and get back to our editor. And notice that now in our objects, we have this FPS controller. And it's got this little triangle next to it. And if you expand it, you're going to get some more pieces of what makes up an FPS controller. So we've got all these different objects over here, which we have FPS controller script. We've got a rigid body, which gives us collision so that we can collide with the ground and walk on it. We've got audio source. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Doesn't look like anything is assigned to it. If we go to our FPS controller, we've got our camera, which gives us the look from the player's eyes perspective. That's what we want to have in an FPS. We've also got an audio listener, which basically gives our characters ears. So now when we run, we can move our guy around. Look up, look down, everything works good. So I want to do maybe one more thing, which is build this terrain up a little bit. So I'm going to zoom out, and if you ever forget where your character is, where did he go? There he is. We can click on it and know that that's where our first-person controller is. Now we can move around in our scene a little bit. I'm going to click on this hand, and I can just move my scene around like this. We know this is where our guy is going to be. We have access to this entire world that he's on to build cool stuff. So I am going to just kind of zoom in about here. We'll go back to our terrain and look over here in the inspector. We've got some things here like this. We'll raise and lower the terrain. So click to raise, hold shift to lower. And I can do something like this. Build like a mountain of some kind. All right. And if we run, let's see what happens. Now here we are, and these are the mountains we just built. And we can walk up them and look around and see what we've got. And now we're back to our plane. And now we're back over here. So generally what you might want to do is just build like gigantic mountains around the perimeter of this little terrain plane that we have here. That way, make them really steep so that your character can't get over the top of them. That way, they'll be contained to that little box that we have. But for now, we don't need to be too accurate. I just want to show how this stuff works. Okay, so let me unplay this thing here. And it would be really cool if these mountains were a different texture, because having the ground this grassy color and the mountains this grassy color is sort of boring. So we're going to add in, we want to paint, but we want to paint with a new texture. So I'm going to hit Add Texture, and we will come over here to our terrain assets, and here's this cliff. I'm just going to drag that up here. Add, and then now I'm going to click over here to select this new one, and then I can paint with it on top of these mountains. And you can change your brush size and that sort of stuff, and opacity to make it look really nice. But just to get the point across, I'm just going to kind of do it really quick. And now when I run, we've got our grass, and it sort of blends into these rocky cliffs. There we go. And so you can build, paths with different kinds of materials. You can bring in textures, create your own inside of Photoshop to make it look however you want it to look. So anyways, this is pretty much, I think, all that I wanted to get through. Let's see. You can add trees, you can add water, that sort of stuff. And the idea right now is to just go through and start playing around, building mountains, checking out what all these different options do, and just try to make something that's unique for you and looks cool. So that's about all I want to do for this first pass.